Great. Well, I'm so glad you were able to meet today, and I'm looking forward to kind of chatting a bit about your practice a little bit more. So, and just to start off, I know you go by the artist name Dauma. Would you like to refer to you as Dauma throughout, or?
Yeah. I just usually it's kind of like a little nickname that's stuck, and it's easier for everyone.
Fantastic. Great. So just before I get fully started, I will just do a little bit of an introduction so that people listening will have a little idea of your background and who you are. So Dauma Stirbyte, also known as Dauma, was born and raised in Lithuania and moved to Ireland in 2007. She graduated from the National College of Art and Design in Ireland in 2016 with a Bachelor of Design and a specialization in ceramics. Dauma was a long-term international artist in residence at the London Clay Art Centre in Canada from 2017 to 2020. Congratulations. Where she also taught sculpture classes. Since moving to Canada, she has taken part in numerous group shows, exhibitions, and fundraisers, one of which exhibition that we're going to talk about today. She is currently represented by galleries across Ontario, and since July of 2020, Dauma has been working independently from her home studio, where we see her today, which is located in London, Ontario. Great. We're so happy to have you here, Dauma, and joining us today to talk a little bit more about your practice, but also a bit more in depth about the exhibition, your first kind of solo show at the gallery, alongside a solo show by Drew Mosley. We're really looking forward to the reception this weekend, and that's the October 15th, 3 to 5 p.m. So your exhibition with us here, Creatures of Habit. I guess I'll just start with kind of the most general, obvious question one might kind of want to know. Where did the title for the show come from?
So yeah, I don't, titles are always really hard for me, and I used to have a really hard time like just naming my pieces. So I used to just sort of stay like very generic, but then I sort of realized that I can, use titles or like show titles and titles of the pieces as like an extension, or to say more about, like, to convey my message. So because I was kind of, the whole idea of the show was trying to marry like the two subjects that I'm interested in, like the nature and animal life and like insect life, but also some of the figurative work and trying to think of our own habits that we form as people. I kind of thought of like that connection that was already there. And I thought, we're creatures and they're creatures. So it's kind of like, it was like very obvious for me in my mind. It just totally made sense. So yeah, that's how it came about.
No, I think that totally, I mean, like you're saying, titles, I kind of like just speak to a little bit more of the work. And I think that kind of connection between being creatures of habit speaks to, I think, more of a, instincts, or, I think of like the ants running around on our walls currently and, how structured they are. And yeah, so I think that really pulls in a lot of our innate human habits, and really kind of links us to, these creatures that you created throughout the space. And how they interact with each other. Another thing I'm quite curious myself, being an artist, I always wonder what kind of drew somebody to their particular medium. So I know you've been working in ceramics for quite some time. Was there like anything in particular where you're like, oh, it has to be ceramics? So did you experiment?
I think that I actually came about to like ceramics pretty late, because I didn't, there's a lot of schools in Canada that I found out when I moved here that have ceramics departments when they're in secondary school or like high school. And I never had that chance. Like, we would just be like drawing and painting and whatever. And then when I went to college, I got to try out a little bit of everything, because the first year is sort of like the core year, and you get to just kind of decide, kind of explore, do different things. And I did ceramics there. And I think it was the tactile aspect of it, and the fact that I could create things in 3D. Like, it's sort of, it became like from my usual, working on a piece of paper or something like very 2D, that you could create this object that's now exists like in the same space as us. Like, it takes up as much room as us, and it has like presence and personality. And ceramics, I think has just so many, there's just so much to explore. Like I feel like, you know, I've been doing it for a good few years now. I think like 7 years maybe, or 6, whatever it is. And I always feel like there's more to explore. There's more to try. There's so many different ways to work with it, and you can imitate other materials, and you can do like really painterly stuff or watercolor looking washes. There's a lot of potential and a lot of different ways to work with it. So I find that it's never boring. There's always something more that I, you know, haven't tried or want to experiment with. So
yeah, I think that comes across in your work. You play a lot with the texture. I think we see that across like every different piece. I'm thinking of specimen number 5 right now, kind of the tails that come out the back there, and this is like almost crackling effect, and then the contrast between like a soft, very like almost ephemeral little airbrushing of your colors that just blends so smoothly. So there's this great play back and forth between like texture and color, and I think you really push that to a limit. At the same time, so controlled. I mean, your surface areas on your beetles are so small, and yet you manage to kind of really explore quite a bit with them. And I think also you're saying, you know, there's always all these new things to try and all these different techniques, but I think you do have such a very distinct style, and like, you know, somebody could look at one of your pieces and say, oh, that is a Dauma piece, you know. So I think they always, like, all these techniques and everything, you always kind of take them and you absorb them in, and it seems like it absorbs into your practice rather than kind of changing your practice in a different way, which I think is really, really lovely. I also am quite curious because while we were installing the show, a lot of the figurative pieces, which as I understand, they're a little bit newer to your practice. Is that correct?
Yeah, the figurative only kind of started, I want to say like halfway through COVID, because it was when I was working at home, and I had always wanted to explore some figurative, but because I had been working in such like abstract shapes before, I didn't quite know how to like marry those two things together. And so I did a little show at the Gardener at the beginning of this year. And then that was just like completely all figurative, like it's very narrative. There was no beetles, no kind of creature elements. There was some warm elements, but no beetles or ants or anything like that. And it was just all figurative. And I really wanted to find a way to kind of the balance between the two, because I still, you know, very much enjoy, and I don't want to abandon like the botanic side, the insect side of my work. So yeah, the figurative is quite new.
Yeah, I think you did a wonderful job of marrying it in this show, in particular, the way that you have the natural elements kind of either growing out of the figurative elements, like way out where the eye is kind of turning into a flower, and same thing with the one with all the kind of the tight tubes and the worms on top there after the rain, and that one I think as well, where the figure almost becomes a landscape for the other elements. So I think those are really nice ways of merging the two, where there's this element of transformation or the figure becoming more of a location of sorts. But I am curious if you consider any of the figurative pieces portraits or self-portraits.
Yeah, sometimes some of them. I think necessarily I would say it sort of goes across like not as I am now, but I think sometimes it will sort of portray me at some point in time that's not necessarily right now, if that makes sense. So I've done work previously as well where I used like some of my childhood photos or like the outfit that I was wearing as like a research to sort of oh gosh, what's the word? To reference the connection to my childhood. So yeah, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And sometimes it's sort of like a futuristic, maybe. It's sort of, yeah, it goes kind of like past, present, and future. I feel like sometimes just kind of blend and blur together. So yeah.
I asked because we were installing the works and noting how a few of the facial features are like, oh, it kind of looks like her. You know, I wonder if there's an intention behind that, you know?
Somewhat.
And I think, yeah. And yeah, I think I see the past, present, and future kind of, I think working in such a very, I mean, your works come across very kind of fantasy based, very imaginative, obviously. So I think there is this almost futuristic sense to them, especially with the hybrid, like insect and floral ceramics. I think there's a real great sense of otherworldliness there, whether it's something a bit alien, that's still really nicely tethered to our world.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
that kind of makes it even stranger because I think when you have something like a reference, a piece that's of our world, and then something that's like totally alien, and those are kind of married together into one piece, I think it makes the alien part even stranger because it almost like highlights the like how unusual, like the oddness of it. Because when I did in the past where I've done just sort of more abstract kind of creature-based work, I think that maybe the message was somewhat lost. So I think this, I think I'm distilling down slowly into really what I want to say, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm curious whether you're a sci-fi fan at all, or
Yeah, I'd say so. I think that I have a pretty eclectic taste in like movies and music because I just like such wide array of things. Like there's very little that I can like find appreciation for or like interesting in some way.
yeah, and I think all those things come in and affect the work over time, right? So but yeah, you're saying about that strange familiarity, that kind of uncanniness of recognizing something that looks like it could be part of our world, but then it feels other, right? And I love that aspect of your work. I think it gives such a good life to the pieces, and like you're saying, how they can share space with us. And I mean, I work in the gallery all the time, so like just in the past few days being here with the pieces, you know, especially your wallflower pieces, you know, I'm literally being stared at.
So it just follows you around the room. You can't get away from the stare.
Yeah, no, and I was thinking about it for quite some time, and thinking about those works in particular. Like obviously there's a very great connection to them because they have that, the eyeballs just looking right at you, right? There's that immediate eye contact. But I really liked how it almost and it made me think of Manet, a lot of Manet's paintings where he would kind of flip the gaze, right? Where there was always this kind of trend of, you know, the female figure being looked at as like a passive like element in a painting, and then he had painted a female figure who was staring right back and very kind of direct and assertive, like. And it made me think of that, you know, this kind of maybe relationship where often nature is looked at as this kind of passive entity that we act on. But then I think your use of the eyes really gives that great quality of it really like asserting a gaze on us and, you know, putting us under the microscope. And
That's a really great compliment. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm also curious if you have like, do you use direct reference for your beetle and flora like combinations, or are they all just kind of made up?
No, I do use references, especially with color, but sometimes texture as well. Color though, mostly because I always found that color was the most difficult thing for me. Even, you know, going as far back as being in college, I could, you know, build like hundreds of different shapes and come up with shape. Form was never an issue for me, but color was always kind of difficult. So when I finally kind of worked it out, I think like over the last, I want to say 3 years, and now I'm really happy with the finishes and the color that I'm getting. But it was like, it was a really long struggle. So I use references. You know, I have like little folders with just like, I'll collect photos of like all the cool looking beetles or florals, or maybe it's just like a close up or something and you can't actually tell what the thing is. And yeah, and like the shine is often like the lusters that I use on the beetles, that strongly relates to, because like a lot of them, when you look at them like under a microscope, a lot of them are so tiny, but then when you get like a blown up image of them, they're so ornate and so beautiful, and there's like all of these colors, and texture. Like there's so much happening on such a tiny form. So there's definitely I tend to look at reference. Yeah.
And where do you tend to find those? I mean, do you go on like deep dives, or is it just things you happen across, or do you have like a source that you like best? Or
I use Pinterest a lot. It's just easy to sort of like into neat little folders, but like I'll just like Google things and go down a rabbit hole and click one thing after another and another and another. I do also like to I'll go to the library and like get books and scan pages, and I've gotten a really great book about bugs as a gift, and that's just like a really beautiful, like full of these huge like blown up pictures of beetles. So yeah, and sometimes I'll just like if I go for a hike or something and I find like a cool texture or color, like a twig or a leaf or something, I kind of collect crap too. Like I'll just bring like all sorts of things back to my studio and just yeah, so it kind of comes from everywhere, I think.
Yeah, I think as artists we're always like absorbing our environment, right? And it just all feeds into what we're doing at the time. And but yeah, do you ever like I can relate to the whole scavenging aspect, right? And so you scavenge things, and do you just use them as like texture reference, or do you ever include them in your work?
I haven't included them in my work ever, although I have considered a few times. I'm trying to kind of work out some things where I want to incorporate wooden pieces, like wooden elements into my work. So I haven't done it yet. Most of the time I just use them as references, or just to keep in the studio and just I guess like surround myself with things that I find fascinating or interesting in some way. And like some of the times they'll end up being part of something and sometimes they won't. And yeah.
Yeah, I imagine it's got to be a pretty very different process trying to incorporate like natural elements into the ceramics. Obviously many of them can't be fired.
Yeah, so it has to kind of come after, and trying to, like, if you're really trying to kind of measure, things have to fit in a certain way, then that can kind of become an issue. So it's not maybe the easiest thing, but yeah, I'll see. I really like woodworking. I like I'd love to like bring that in somehow, so I'll see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. Always developing, right? Great. I did also I really like your reference to a lot of kind of like, I guess, human vices or indulgences. You talk a lot about connecting your pieces based in nature to like the human condition. And I think one of my favorite works from the show is called Vices, and it's just these two little ants wearing party hats closing in on this dish of sugar cubes, and I was like, oh, I relate to that so well.
Yeah. Yeah, that one I do really like that one. I'm really happy actually with how the sugar cubes turned out, because I hadn't done anything like that before and I wasn't sure how it ended up looking, but they actually do look like they're covered in like their sugar.
Yeah.
And it just it made me remember, like, my grandmother used to have like this little pot of sugar cubes, and when I was little I used to like sneak in and just like eat them, because it was like they were like candy, and they looked so cute and pretty, and I was like, oh, it's cute as sugar. And she used to like go mad at me for doing that, and they were like hidden in a special room that was only for guests or whatever, and I used to just go in there and eat sugar cubes. So but I think it's just yeah. Not sure if everybody has that relation to sugar cubes.
Just pure sugar shock right there. Probably just want you bouncing off the walls later. But yeah, and then I think you also kind of carried that through in the other ant pieces like sourpuss and lemon not lime. So all these kind of like human little indulgences we like fruit, drink, and I was wondering, I know you mentioned 3 months before, or I read it in your statement, I suppose, but you're interested, you said, a lot in beetles and insects in particular, because of like the structures of how they like have social structures and interactions. And And you seem to focus quite a bit on like insect and beetle life. So I was wondering how, like, what initially made you connect those two together? Like, what was the point where you kind of were like, oh, like I see this really great similarity between us and them?
I don't know what made me see the similarity. I think the ants kind of brought it up because when I first actually started making the beetle pieces was when I moved to Canada. It was like the first year I was here, and we were renting this place that was sort of like a little old and a little sketchy. We got these like bugs got into our house, and I had never seen them before, and I was like, what the hell are these? Like, and so I started Googling, and I found out they were like stink bugs, and they like just completely terrified me. And they're big and they're loud. Like when they fly, you can like hear them coming. So it was terrifying. But so anyway, so like through that kind of started off the research into the insect world overall, because then it kind of led me to see all these different types of beetles that were really beautiful and ornate, and I was like, wow, I had no idea. But I think the way that I connected like us as like people and ants, I feel like it's just, I think that I was watching some sort of a documentary or listening. I like to listen to a lot of podcasts about like all sorts of nature things, and we were talking about ants and like kind of like their societies and how they have, this like innate like need, like they'll work even though like maybe if they lose their queen or if they get trapped somewhere, they will just keep working. They'll just keep going and building and doing stuff. And I kind of thought that like that constant need to just like, they don't stand still. You never see an ant just like hanging out, like doing nothing. And I feel like that's, our culture has kind of become like that. Like you're not allowed to relax. You're not allowed to like be still and just sort of, slow down. Like you always have to be going. And I started thinking that like I'm kind of like an ant. Like I feel like I work a lot, and I try really hard, and I'm constantly on the go. And I think that was the initial connection. And also like seeing images. I don't know if you've ever seen like micro shots of like ants like carrying these huge like oversized things, and it's like how are they doing it? They're so small and delicate, and yet they're carrying these massive things that are like 100 times their body size. And that kind of made me think of like being like this overachiever and like overwork. And yeah, so that was another way how it sort of connected in my head.
Yeah, no, I think that makes complete sense. And I see that when I look at your ants, I think of these like scurrying, like, it's like, anxiety to create and make and do, and it's just like, just like never stops. It's just kind of this continuous role. Yeah, no, I like that connection quite a bit. And then same thing with the beetles. There's a little bit of more of, I think, a slower pace in their insect floral combinations. Like I get really like a sense of like a really enjoyment for the beauty of their form. I think maybe you were talking about that earlier, where like your like form was always like really an easy thing for you and came to you quite naturally. So I see a really great appreciation for like the beauty in nature. But then you also have this kind of great humorous side too. And yeah, I guess like how does like humor, it seems very important to you, and so I'm like curious to hear more about like the importance of humor in your work for you.
Yeah, I think that's just the way I tend to cope like in life in general. So I think it like eventually just overspills into my work. For a while I don't think that maybe it was like that. I tried to keep it like very separate and serious, and I thought that maybe I'm not supposed to be like funny or whatever. I should just like stay more professional and not kind of mix the two. But yeah, I really wanted the work to kind of speak to who I was and how I am as a person. And I think a lot of the times when something difficult happens, or I think a lot of people find comfort in humor, and I think that like I'm the same way. So so the worm pieces originally started with like I made these cans of worms that had like really like intricate labels, and they're like really fun, and like the worms are kind of popping out and they're all like silly looking. It's just kind of like a play on words and like the idiom, you know, like, oh, let's not open this can of worms. So I think that was me like dipping my toes into sort of letting the humor into my work. And now I feel a little more comfortable and a little more relaxed with it. So um, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. And like you said, it's a coping mechanism, right? And so you're like, I think you're pulling up all these important notions of kind of like our society and how like busy and complex and rushed and high and fast paced everything is, right? And kind of dulling that or giving us a way out through this kind of humorous lens. So it's this nice kind of softening of that. And I know you talk about your work quite a bit as like as a route for escapism. So I think the humor kind of definitely helps like play into that doorway out, right? So I guess, sorry.
For sure, yeah. Sorry, it's just
yeah. Yeah, and so I think that definitely makes complete sense. And then I guess also the role of escapism in your work. Like I see, are you quite into like, I get an impression of kind of like I would love to see your works as like an animated film or something, you know, like they have such great life to them. And I wonder if you kind of see them and the work that you're doing almost as this creation of this space where we kind of have to like suspend our reality, you know, and kind of enter it. Is that kind of what you're hoping for when you get to show pieces?
I'd say so. I think it's like definitely about kind of creating an alternate like reality or an alternate space where I think the thing that's been really important to me as well, and in everything I make, is that it's sort of like really trying to like highlight, I suppose, like a childlike curiosity about things, because I think a lot of people just like as we grow older, we don't maybe have as much time for play, and we don't notice a lot of the beautiful details that surround us. And so I think it's my attempt at sort of stopping somebody for a moment and having them just like, you know, have this like mystical magical moment and be like, oh, what is that, like what is that about? Like I think that trying to create that moment is important, and when I work, I think I create that for myself, because I always, you know, I try to find ways to challenge myself. And so I think, yeah, first I have my moment first, and then I hope that somebody who sees my work also has that kind of same reaction and is interested and intrigued and kind of pulled in and maybe a little grossed out, maybe a little scared, but also kind of fascinated at the same time. So there's like a push and pull.
Yeah, no, I think you're achieving that for sure. And I think even especially when you get to display it in a show all together, right? You can really kind of command the space and see everything interacting with each other. And it does start to feel like this world is just kind of like proliferating around you. And so I think it kind of sucks people in, and it's, people have been responding very positively to it so far. So we're very much looking forward to the opening on Saturday. I'm just looking at a few notes here. Oh yeah, I was curious. I don't know. I get like, do you have any like favorite? Again, I'm going back to this like animation thing. Like, do you have a favorite animation or animated movie? Or because I get this like, I mean, there's that sense of play and fun there with the undertones of serious, and I think that kind of like makes a lot of sense with your work. So I'm wondering if you.
Yeah, I did actually consider like briefly when I was in college doing something with animation, but I think that a lot of it is, well, unless you do like stop motion, a lot of it is kind of computer based. So I think that was the only thing that kept me away from it. But favorite animation, I have two. So what the stop motion one would be Coraline, and there was a book as well, and then the other one would be Rango. I don't know if you ever seen it or watched.
Oh, is that with the chameleon kind of? There's like a chameleon. I haven't seen it yet, but I'll have to watch it now.
This like torso of a Barbie who's his girlfriend, and he's just like this really like eccentric character. Coraline is like this kind of a terrifying story actually, and it was a little more scary in the book because I read the book and I watched the movie, but they did a really good job with the animation. This like girl who, you know, goes through like a trap door and finds this whole fantasy world that looks really great on surface, but it actually turns out to be really evil. So those would definitely be my two favorites.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that, you know, underlying your world is, you know, evil, right? I get the opposite sense with your world. There's almost a strangeness to it, but then it's just like a really great sense of like beauty and creation, I think, is what I get out of it, with all that underlying sense of humor too.
Yeah, I don't think that I would ever I don't think I intend it to come across as evil. I think more like playfulness and curiosity is definitely at the forefront.
Yeah, no, I think that 100% comes across. Yeah, and then I guess we're just past the little 30-minute mark there, so I'm gonna end with like a super hard-hitting question here. What's your favorite insect?
Oh.
Is it like asking you to pick amongst your children, or?
Yeah, it's hard. Like I'm just gonna have to go with like a carpenter ant, or maybe no, a leaf cutter ant, because they're the ones that sort of like carry big chunks of like wooden sticks,
Yeah.
and they'll cut out pieces of leaf and like all of this, like they're foragers. So I'm gonna have to go with leaf cutters. I got to see them in action when I was actually dropping off work on that weekend.
Oh.
In the Natural Museum of what's it called in Ottawa. Yeah. So they had this whole like tank set up, and it was just like, oh my god, it was the best day ever.
Fangirling. Okay, so the overachievers and the foragers are the ones you like the best. Well, I will sign off with just a little information on the show again for those who are listening. This is Dauma's Creatures of Habit, is on right now at Benz Gallery. So the show opened on October 8th and it will be on until the 27th. So make sure you don't miss it. It's a wonderful, wonderful exhibition. If you're in town, we will be having the reception on October 15th, but from 3 to 5 p.m. And we hope that you can make it. All right. I want to thank you so much, Dauma, for making it out and doing this talk with us today. And we look forward to seeing you in Ottawa again soon.
Oh, thank you so much for you and the team at Wallspace, and I hope that the opening goes fantastic. I'm sure it will. Yes. Thanks for everything.
Thank you. Bye, Dauma.
Bye.